I spent hours watching and analyzing the latest Dawn of War gameplay footage and talking it over with some of my viewers, hardcore Warhammer 40k fans, and fellow content creators, and our conclusion is that while the presentation of this very important upcoming RTS is good, its functionality, including unit readability, is not. But let's start from the beginning. Dawn of War 4 is now much closer to its planned release date in September of 2026, so we got these two Battlefield reports as multiplayer matches between its developers, and all four factions were in the spotlight. Space Marines took on Orcs with ease, while Necrons gave Adeptus Mechanicus a good fight, but ultimately cracked under pressure from higher tier units. Yes, these were just devs playing, not hardcore RTS gamers. There is a lot that was left unutilized in both tactics and micro, but we can't judge them for it. These were show matches after all, not duels to prove who is the better player. This was also a great way of doing some transparent marketing, which is a big plus. But with that comes the baggage of an unfinished game version, which ultimately showed a lot of its shortcomings. You probably noticed I don't cover Dawn of War 4 regularly on my channel, and that is precisely because I feared that it would come to this. I wished with all my might to stay optimistic, but I also had huge reservations about what would come of this game. I have been watching its development with trepidation because of the change of the developer team and the failed third game of the franchise, whose existence I will only ever acknowledge once during this very sentence. Now, instead of Relic Entertainment, which gave us Homeworld, Impossible Creatures, original Dawn of War, Company of Heroes, and even Age of Empires 4, the project was passed on to King Art Games, whose only previous RTS game development project was Iron Harvest. We all have our own thoughts on that one, and while it was later improved and changed, most players don't find it a good RTS game. With all of that out of the way, let's dive in straight to the point, and I will try to make both the good and the bad as obvious as possible. Near the end of the Space Marines vs Orc matchup, we got a look at the two commanders, which will be generic in name in the full version, but here they are Ezreal and Gazkata. The two devs set up a small skirmish between the two, but in the defensive fire range of the Orcs HQ building and some turrets. Now we have to analyze this almost frame by frame, as due to the extreme low time to kill in this version of the game, everything happens too fast. Anyway, the Space Marine commander guns his bike and slams into Slug Boys meters before the models even make any contact. First of all, this means the hitboxes for units are massive and are activated much further away than where the unit model starts. This is something I will show you more examples of later. Second, the entire unit of Slugga Boys gets slammed to the ground, meaning there are no individual hitboxes or model states for the soldiers in a unit. They are visually different soldiers in a unit, there are several models of them, but mechanically they are just one entity. Next, I want you to keep your eyes on the Gazkata commander on his mount, and even more specifically his sword hand and his sword, as he will not swing that sword once during the entirety of this fight, nor will he hit anything with it. From the start of this fight to its end, there are 13 seconds. During these 13 seconds, the only action besides casting his Beastie Rage ability is when his mount deals one single attack at the enemy's Blade Guard unit, which does absolutely nothing to it. But one of the worst things for me is that when one of the devs said, "let's dance," that is exactly what happened with the commanders. There was no melee synced combat we heard so much about in the promotional materials, but an awkward twitching of the Gazkata commander's model in this and that direction, which produced no actual combat. Even worse, this kind of movement and fighting with empty air continues as a Death Dread Orc Walker unit fights the Blade Guard. It just keeps doing the same twitching and spins 90 or even 180 degrees instantaneously as it tries to engage the Space Marines unit. These two engagements honestly left me dumbfounded and with a gaping jaw as I was in disbelief as to just how badly this works mechanically in the gameplay. The melee attempts by the Orcs units to damage the Space Marines amounted to almost zero actual damage, and most of the damage done to Space Marines units was from the Orcs HQ building and its range guns, as well as the range attacks of the Death Dread Walker unit until it engaged them in melee. The melee looks to be broken and entirely non-functional, as units struggle to even engage their targets. The only unit which seems to be managing to inflict damage with their melee attacks was the Blade Guard. The damage that was inflicted to both sides came mostly from the turrets, not just on the Orcs HQ building, but ones from the Orcs base, those light blue energy balls, and the rockets from the Space Marines Hammerfall bunker. That's the one which has the dual missile system on the top. Now I know it is a lot to take in a fight that lasts a few dozen seconds, but that is the kind of heavy duty analysis you have to get into to get the specific inner workings for a game like this. And doing this is made even harder due to several reasons. First of all, the zoom level is high, making units small, while effects like smoke, blood spatter, weapons exhaust, flame and explosions are massive compared to those unit models. Those effects completely obscure entire units, not just individual soldier models. Second, the ground textures are so similarly colored and designed that units like Orcs on this map blend into it, especially as they look more yellow or orange than green here. The blood spatter on the ground gets so big that even after all the blown up body parts disappear from the ground and the blood pools remain, now you can't see the red Space Marines against it. And they bleed so much you would think their body is the size of their armor. And on the topic of dead and blood, not only is blood splatter smaller and less red in the definitive edition of Dawn of War 1, but the bodies remain, not just body parts, but full bodies with their weapons in hand. And in the game that its developers say is heavily inspired by Dawn of War 1, not only does it lack actual bodies, but all the weapons dropped by units. Even when full-plate Space Marines get blown up in this clip, they just poof into red mist. No armor left over, no weapons. The entire soldier model just turns into a puddle of blood. If we directly compare the two games, the difference in mentioned elements is stark and obvious. Now, this visibility issue is even more impacted when the player uses the Necrons faction because of their power matrix, which in its current visual design impacts visibility so much I am not even sure how it got past the quality assurance offices. It's basically a map creep mechanic produced by most of their buildings and ties directly into their faction's unique mechanic called the Dominion. So to even gain resources, they have to spread their power matrix across as much of the map as they can. And this is what is great about the games and this faction's design, in addition to the resurrection galleries and that whole mechanic. Each faction plays in a distinctly different way, forcing the players to adapt to the maps, to the current enemy they have on the map and their specific faction mechanics. Like how Space Marines need to capture more power production map objectives to call in higher tiered units, or how the Orcs can build anywhere on the map and produce both top tier and some free units during a full WAH! Or the Adeptus Mechanicus and their no-sphere network. This is just one of the awesome elements propped up by expansive Warhammer 40k lore that these developers have to work with, and what they need to lean on the most. It is what allows for Strategems, the powers each faction can cast on the battlefield, to have so much variety and also deadly firepower and utility. It is what allows for units to be held in reserve, then dropped from space right onto the battlefield and into the middle of the fight. It's what makes the game and its gameplay differ from Command & Conquer or StarCraft or Company of Heroes. It's those kinds of mechanics inspired by lore which makes Dawn of War a franchise that can be said with pride along the other greats I just mentioned. But when you translate this lore into gameplay, that is what separates good RTS game designers and developers from the average or bad ones. What happens if a Space Marine gets a bike unit to an enemy's HQ building, saves up a ton of units in the meantime, and drops them all at once right on the enemy's HQ, as all he needs is to be in visual range? Is there any game mechanic that can prevent this from happening? I didn't see one, so if you know about it, let me know in the comments. And Strategems gives us another example of this. First of all, they are activated and cast almost the moment they are clicked on the map, meaning the enemy player has no time to react to them. There is also no visual that shows that they are about to become active. Now, I don't know whether they tweaked for this specific showcase to make it easier for showing, or have they not yet been part of the balancing, but I sincerely hope this isn't their final version. In each faction's case, using them is faster and easier than any other RTS game I have played which had such faction powers. It makes the whole gameplay much more arcadey and very far from even tactical gameplay, let alone strategic one. Another strange choice is making research free in a resource cost and just requiring time to be unlocked after being clicked on. This takes away much from planning and player's choice. It's just an option to tick off as you play instead of an actual decision you have to think about and compare to both the current combat situation on the battlefield and your resource income and expenses. A similar issue is with unit upgrades, or Wargear as it's named here. It seems to be just a clicking mechanic with a very low resource cost and time to finish it. Basically a block of checkmarks to click on instead of an important decision to make depending on the enemy you are facing, their plans and positioning. Again, very unlike the original Dawn of War game. But why would positioning even matter on maps that are absolutely flat? Both maps shown here have zero differences in elevation. If you took an eraser to these maps in the map editor and removed the artificial walls which separate the map sections into lanes of sorts, you would end up with just a flat square. This is horrendous, and I honestly hope it's just a remainder of a previous alpha version used for testing, because if maps like this make up the multiplayer pool in September, there will be no multiplayer to speak of, especially if it turns out replays or the Spectator mode are not day one features. Now, I'm sure you saw comments asking where is the bloody cover in this game. The truth is, it's there, but it's designed in such a way that it's both useless and unused by players. On these maps you can find two pre-placed types of cover, the bunker, which no player ever uses, and the sandbag or rock cover, which again no player ever uses. These are fixed on the map, and one of them only functions in one direction as cover. With entirely flat maps, craters which are only visual fluff and not functioning terrain destruction, there is no other cover to speak of. And I know how much this gameplay element means to players, so as I said, I really hope this isn't on par with the full release version. Feel free to tell me in the comments how much this feature means to you from 1 to 10. Last thing I want to break down in this video, as I am already becoming too negative about the game for my own good, is the damage, armor and armor penetration. As is visible in several gameplay clips, basic units are able to deal damage to light and heavy infantry and vehicles, as well as structures with even the most basic weapons like the bolt rifles. But the biggest issue here is that the damage reduction from light infantry to structures is only 40 to 50%. This is a massive difference to the original Dawn of War, where most units would deal token damage against structures or vehicles, and the damage reduction would be close to 90%. You had to learn which units had the weapons capable of dealing damage to vehicle armor or structures, and use those specific units for that job. There are such units in this game, don't get me wrong, and the armor and armor penetration system, which is shown in the unit's UI on the bottom right. Also, the design of the unit's marking above their head is there to show you the capability and main use of these units, but they haven't been made necessary enough. This current gameplay gives me the unfinished game vibes, where in Homeworld 3 you could just produce scouts and deal infinite damage as armor on other ships didn't function, and basic units could take down any other unit with enough raw damage. This is actually why during the Necrons vs Adeptus Mechanicus match, the dev playing with the Necrons didn't feel the need to tech up fast enough, as just spamming dozens of warrior units worked well enough for him. Spamming a single unit, which doesn't have much damage reduction against top tier units and their special armor types, leads to cheap gameplay that isn't fun for anyone, or makes the rest of the game's content worthwhile. Now, I could go into the placement of capture points, generators which can only be constructed at specific map locations, the current upkeep mechanic, units shooting through each other and their buildings, no individual unit health bars, retreat and reinforcement mechanics, and so many other elements. Especially the insanely low time to kill for units. You can tell me which ones you want me to talk about in a future video, as I have reached my supply topic limit for this one. To see more news and upcoming games, check out my other videos shown here as cards or links in the description. Thank you for watching, and I wish you all happy gaming.